All right, welcome to the David Moscrop Show. I am, you're never going to guess, David Moscrop. We workshopped that title for months. I feel like the consultants got every nickel, every dime they deserved. You really know what you're getting. This is a new show for me. It's a little different. It's going to be a little looser, a little more casual, but I hope just as smart as ever. And if you're going for smart, you can't do any better than my first guest, my inaugural guest, activist, author, tech expert, all around good voice to have in your ear, Cory Doctorow. Thank you so much for joining me to launch this thing.
Well, thank you, David. What an honor to be your inaugural. Let us hope that this inauguration is better than the last one.
Well, like many inaugurations, I just want to use this moment to say that I'm going to be expanding my territory into my next door neighbor's house.
Okay, very good.
And yeah,
Well, your neighbor will retaliate by punching themselves in the face until you stop. And then we will have the full package.
when has that not worked?
Uh, as far as I can tell, given that I have no object permanence and I am a baby, it has always worked. There is no history. The universe is created de novo with every moment, and we are lucky to be in it.
And speaking of de novo, I had this moment today. I was thinking, who taught Donald Trump who James Monroe is? I don't know where. Someone must have said to him, we got him like a President's First President's book, and said there was this guy. Boy, you're gonna love him. And here we
I,
are.
so I actually have a theory about this. I don't mean to be empathic to Donald Trump here or anything, but as an autodidact, right? Like I dropped out of 4 undergraduate programs. I spent 7 years in a 4 year high school, kind of taught myself everything. I know a lot of weird things, and also there are a lot of things that I don't know. And so I kind of get that vibe from Trump, right? Like he is a guy who's been surrounded by people, many of whom are probably pretty interesting, if stupid or bad, who are full of factoids. Like I bet, remember that meme about like, does your dad think about the Roman Empire a lot? I bet Donald Trump is like surrounded by people who know a shit ton about things like stoicism and like obscure punishments meted out to enemies of Greek city states and stuff. And some of it's probably even true. And it sticks, right? And like look, he's a bullshitter and a crowd pleaser. And so when you find an anecdote that kind of fits in with the thing that you want to say, you remember it and then you tell it a bunch, and then it sort of takes on an outsized role in your view of the world, and before you know it, the factoid that you use to like bridge two different parts of a stump speech or a after dinner story suddenly becomes like the central part of your identity. I mean, whomst among
Yeah,
us has not had that happen?
yeah. He's surrounded by people who know that Iron Maiden isn't just a band, right? They're like we know what that is. I mean, Elon Musk for sure, who plays a lot of Diablo. Elon Musk for sure knows what an Iron Maiden is. For
so,
all, I mean,
so
sure, for all kinds of reasons. I'm sure.
this is a perfect example because I just happen to know, because I wrote a blog post about it probably 10 years ago, that the Iron Maiden was a hoax created like 300 years after the supposed era of the Iron Maiden, and that there is no such thing as an Iron Maiden. Like they were literally just made along with like chastity cages. They were things that were made by weirdos centuries after the fact as kind of like, boy, weren't they dumb in the olden days things.
I feel ripped off a little bit now.
Yeah. You like to think that like in that documentary History of the World that Mel Brooks made, when they show you all the things that Tokumoto was using on those poor guys, that they were all real. But it turns out Brooks was rooked with the rest of us.
Well, speaking of getting rooked, what a great segue, because I want to talk about tech oligarchs. I'm trying to wrap my head around this because we just saw Shopify here in Canada bend the knee to Trump. We've seen Amazon do it. We've seen Apple do it. We've seen Meta do it. We're seeing Musk and Trump's inner circle dismantling whatever was good about the US state and, in effect, quite literally seizing the treasury. I saw someone tweet today, some expert at George Mason, well, it's really novel that they've taken over the treasury. I'm like, that seems to be the least novel thing in the history of coups. You pretty much go for the treasury pretty early on. And I'm
Sure.
trying to.
I mean, Trotsky went after the telegram office, but I understand.
Right, the airports, but you got to get to the treasury pretty fast.
Yeah,
I
sure.
always thought. And I'm wondering if people are reaching or about to reach a point at which to say, oh, maybe this tech oligarchy isn't in it for me. Do you think there's a kind of consciousness raising moment where people are like, uh-oh,
So look,
these
I
aren't
think
good
that
guys?
I mean, to be sort of serious here, I think that there's a kind of young man, mostly men, who they're like I remember after the Soviet Union collapsed, there was this like huge Ponzi scheme in Albania that just destroyed the whole economy, and everyone was in it, including the finance minister. And the thing was, after the fact, everybody knew it was a Ponzi scheme. They just thought that they were in it early, right? They thought they were the ones who were going to come out on top. And every time I think about cryptocurrency, like I think of those people, right, who are just like, I know this is rigged. I just think I might be one of the people it's rigged for, because I got in early, blah blah blah, right? And I think that there's a minority of people who kind of really worship might be a strong word, although maybe not, but like certainly admire fast operators, right? And like I get it, right? There's something romantic. Like I write books about lovable rogues, right? And in fiction, the Han Solo character is really fun, right? We all liked Ferris Bueller, even though if he was your friend, you'd want to kill him, like not figuratively, like literally, you would try and kill him. And so I get why Donald Trump is accused of cheating on his taxes during the 2016 electoral debates, and he says that makes me smart. And
Mhm.
a bunch of guys all around America just get like rock hard, thinking about just how smart that guy is for having put one over on the system. And so for those people, I think that the fact that Trump and Musk are breaking all the rules uh, is probably not disabusing them of anything. I think they knew who he was, and that's why they liked him. And I think for the rest of us, I think a lot of us assume that the enshittification of all these tech services that we liked was maybe partly the result of these guys, doing something greedy and untoward to screw us over, but was probably mostly like the great forces of history or activist shareholders or like late stage capitalism or something, not like a thing that a particular immoral guy did. Tim Cook, he's cuddly. He came out in
Mhm.
2014 and struck a blow for gay rights. He's not a bad guy. If Apple's doing bad things, it's not because of Tim Cook. You can't expect him to know everything. And I think what's probably happened in the last couple of weeks is that a significant number of those fence sitters who like wanted to believe that there was such a thing as a heroic billionaire, maybe one who is a prisoner of history, whose billions were being used in ways that they didn't like or would just prefer or whatever. Those people are now coming around to actually these guys. It's not just that their services are terrible and were ripping me off, which they already knew. These guys probably did it on purpose.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to talk about those guys specifically because it strikes me that we've got this unholy alliance of big capital who are gaining, increasingly in the center of government. Increasingly
Mm-hmm.
now, I mean, Elon Musk quite literally has an office in the White House. I mean, you can't get more tech oligarchy than that. This isn't even uh, isn't figurative anymore. This is literal by the
Mm-hmm.
time the guy actually moves into the
Mm-hmm.
to the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we're watching these tools we've loved, these sites we've loved, these spaces we've enjoyed crumble. And yet there's always resistance to power. Like this is one of these ideas that I think is so important to hit on that goes way back in philosophy that we've been talking about, well, at least since Foucault, but before, is that whenever there's power or oppression, there's resistance to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, okay, well, there are alternatives. There are different places to shop. There are different browsers. There are different platforms. There's different social media sites, sort of. But
Mm-hmm.
can we get a critical mass to get there and onto these ecosystems? Or are we just utterly trapped in these spaces? Because look, that's where everybody is.
Well, people do abandon platforms, even really sticky ones, eventually. And network effects, they're a double-edged sword, right? So if everyone is on Facebook because that's where everyone is, then when people start leaving Facebook, there's less and less reason to stay, right? So if you're there because that's where your kid's little league team is organizing their carpools, then once a critical mass of those people leave, then that's one less reason to stay. And we have seen big platforms fall apart. So the anthropologist Dana White, who was kind of embedded with MySpace as MySpace fell apart, she said that she could tell when it was going to happen because she could look at like the social graph and she could see, oh hey, there's this person who's like a highly connected node, right? He's like, this person is the reason all these other people are hanging in there. And when that person goes, a lot of those people are going to have far less reason to stay. And then when they all go, it weakens the case for everyone who follows them to stay, and so on. So we have seen these natural tip overs, and we've seen waves of tip out from Twitter and Facebook, in the face of these various scandals. And the one of the things about financialization is that it's a very brittle arrangement. So like you look at these companies, one of the reasons these companies have a durable competitive advantage over new market entrants is because they are stock market darlings. And even more so if they're in the S&P 500, that means that all the index funds have to own a certain amount of shares in them. And so like it's not just that they're like a meme stock or whatever. Like there is this thing that happens. It happened to Musk, right? When when Tesla entered the 500, in the kind of months before that was happening, there were massive buy-ups of Tesla shares in anticipation of the big institutionals all being legally obliged to own a bunch of Tesla shares. So you have these companies that have lots and lots of stock market value, very high value to earnings ratios, and to a first approximation, they can make as much stock as they want just by typing zeros into a spreadsheet. I mean, there's limits on that, but they're pretty loose. And lots of employees would rather be paid in stock in a company like that than money. And
Mhm.
this is great for companies because they only get money when they convince you to buy something, whereas they get stock when they type zeros into a spreadsheet. And so what it means is that if you are going to start a business tomorrow to compete with Facebook, not only do you have all the structural disadvantages of Facebook being very big and established and having this big network, but also your engineers will expect to be paid in dollars, not shares, because nobody wants the shares in Moscrop Co. And so you have to use real dollars. Now, when these companies shrink, even a little, because they are so their earnings to valuation ratios are so nuts, then the market has these panicked sell-offs. So
Mhm.
we saw this with Facebook in 2022 when they reported not even like contraction, negative growth. They reported lower than predicted growth in one market, the U.S., which is the most important market for surveillance advertising based companies because it's the richest country with the worst privacy laws. And so the people there are worth a lot of money and no one protects them. So if you have a surveillance advertising business, Americans are worth more than anyone else in the world. There are other countries that have shitty privacy laws, but they're not rich. And there are other rich countries, but they have good privacy laws. America is like the golden intersection there of bad privacy and lots of money. And so when that happens, you have these huge sell-offs. And when you have these huge sell-offs, all these people who accepted stock or who might be tempted in the near future to accept stock in exchange for their labor suddenly say, no, actually, I'd rather have money.
Mhm.
Right. And so, in the same way that you got this fast unwinding of MySpace, you can get these rapid disassemblies of companies that are super financialized, right? Because they are the toys of the financial market, and they live and die by analysts, right? By people who write finance newsletters, by short sellers. Like again, like not wanting to be in any way sympathetic to Elon Musk. But at one point, he and I had an argument on Twitter. And I was therefore in his mentions for a couple of days where like people were, because there was just a whole flood of people who reply to everything that he said. And every 8 seconds, a bot or a human who was involved in short sales on Tesla would try and do something to put Elon Musk on tilt on Twitter
Mhm.
so that it would lower the share price and their money would go up. Right. And there was just like, it was a very eye-opening experience. Like you can sort of see why Musk was obsessed with inauthentic behavior on Twitter, because while there
Mhm.
was always some of it, like it was, he had like Six Sigma's deviation from the norm of how much inauthentic activity there was that was like in his mentions. So I think that these companies, they experience this very brittle life cycle. They are really uh, surprisingly easily toppled. And the lives of these bullshitters like Musk and Trump are really the lives of people who have spent years in public running across the river on the backs of alligators without losing a leg to them. And
Mm.
they're doing it for like longer than any of us really expected they'd be able to. Trump almost had these big indictments, but he won the election in time. Musk, had like 5 or 6 near-death experience, economically speaking, in the last like 5 or 6 years, 10 years. But uh, they have all managed to keep going. Now, none of them, I think, are on the river on the opposite bank, although Trump is certainly making a dash for it here, right? The consolidation of power, the dismantling of democratic fundamentals. This is about making sure that the crimes that he committed on the way are never accounted for, and that he gets sort of a permanent immunity by dint of substantial change in the system of government. And it's very disheartening to think about that, but it's also a big gambit. And the fact that he's been very lucky and ruthless, and also had the support of a lot of rich weirdos who were willing to trade things that they thought were important for lower taxes and a few other things, um, doesn't guarantee that in the future he will continue to be lucky.
Yeah, there's a lot of leopards ate my face moments recently. I was just seeing Rand. I always forget Rand Paul. Rand Paul's the young one, right? Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. His
And
father, the way to remember it is his father named him after Ayn
after
Rand.
Ayn Rand, that's what came to mind. I'm like, what's the stupidest thing you can name a
Right,
kid?
right,
Right? Okay, must be Ayn Rand.
right.
Uh, I saw him tweeting after Trump had said, "Well, maybe we'll go into Gaza and basically make it Mar-a-Lago or Vegas." And Rand Paul was like, "Wait a second, I thought we agreed to put America first and not go on foreign misadventures in the Middle East." I'm like, "Did you really believe that? Like, really?
Mm-hmm.
You've been with this leopard so long, you didn't think he was going to bite your face off, and then of course it's like day whatever it is 20. It was like, well, maybe we'll go into Gaza and do genocide, and all
Right.
of a sudden these America First people are like, wait, what?
Well, you know what I think it is, because like political change is the result of a coalition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like broadly speaking, sometimes a whole bunch of people will change their mind all at once and demand something different. But usually, if there's like a group of people who've been agitating for a thing for a long time and it hasn't happened, and then the thing happens, it's usually because they found someone else who will go along with them on it. So you
Mm-hmm.
see this with like climate, and you see it sometimes with labor, but you've really seen it with the right. There has been, the rights coalition has been expanding and expanding. You see this in some of the electoral numbers in 2024, where you have, uh, not grotesque numbers, but like larger than anyone would have imagined, of young black men, young Latino men, other kinds of people voting for Trump. And I don't know that it's leopards eating my face so much as them betting that when the coalition divides up the spoils, that they will get whatever it is they wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is why like the religious right votes for Trump, because they're like, you will ban abortion, you will have sex with any number of sex workers and pay them off, and you will, do a whole bunch of things that would have made Jesus very sad, but you will ban abortion, and that's my one issue, and whatever. And I think the person who really like nailed this very well in respect to Trump in this 2024 election cycle was Rick Perlstein, the historian,
Mm-hmm.
who during the whole panic about Project 2025 said, like, you're reading it wrong. Like, there's a Project 2025, but there was also a Project 2021, and there's a Project 2017, and so on. Like, the Heritage Foundation puts these out every 4 years. And if you look at them in any year, but also look at them longitudinally, what you can see is that they have a series of mutually exclusive prescriptions and policy goals. Like, America will be expansionist and imperialist. America will be isolationist and get out of foreign wars. Those will both appear in Project 2025. America will have a loose monetary policy. America will have a tight monetary policy. Like all of these things that appear in there. And what he says is, like, most of the time, if you're the Heritage Foundation and you're editing a document like this, and you have two different factions that want opposite things, one of them is obviously stronger than the other, and the one that isn't stronger has to eat shit, and they just
Mm-hmm.
don't get their demand in the thing. When you see two factions who want mutually opposing things, who both show up in the plan, this is effectively the Heritage Foundation saying, we can't pick a winner here without getting into more trouble than we can afford to have. And so we're going to let both of these guys probably publish their batshit views about monetary policy in our plan for 2025, and then we'll see what happens when the knives come out, and we'll see who survives. And I think a lot of the leopards eating my face people were like, not that they didn't take Trump seriously, but that they thought that in the coalition that came out of it, that they might get what they wanted. I mean, there was a Democratic Party version of this. All the people who were like, vote for Harris and she won't be as bad on Gaza as Biden has been. Really, what those people were saying is vote for Harris and we will force her not to be as bad on Gaza as Biden has been. And like, that's not a completely batshit proposition. There were people who said vote for Biden and we will make him be better on antitrust than he would be otherwise. They knocked it out of the park. We had 4 years of more antitrust than we'd seen in 40 years. So not crazy to say that. So I don't think the leopards eating my face people were naive. I think they just like weighed the balance of power wrong. And also, we don't know what the ultimate balance of power is. We are just seeing the knives start to come out in the Trump coalition. There's going to be lots more.
But someone ends up being the Trotsky. Now to bring it back around, someone ends up with getting ice picked, right? Like ultimately, it's like someone. You mentioned Enshittification earlier, and I every time we talk, I need to talk to you about this because it just dominates so much of my brain space that there are moments where I'm like, "Oh, thanks, Cory," and there are moments I'm like, "I'm trying to do the dishes, and I got other things I got to do."
Well, if you have a dishwasher that has an app that requires a certain kind of detergent, you could, in fact, be experiencing enshittification while doing the dishes.
Well, thankfully, I don't. In part because this dishwasher was already in the house when we bought it, but in part because I'm now like on the watch. I'm shopping for a coffee maker right now, and I just keep thinking about like unauthorized bread. You know, your short story and book, which I love. Like, don't buy. I don't need my coffee maker to be smart. I just need it to make the coffee.
Right.
And but honestly, it's
just to pause that for 1 second. Just get an AeroPress. Just get an AeroPress. AeroPresses are really good.
The problem is, I'm like, then I have to make myself a coffee while I'm making the coffee to be made. I got to wait. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, it
takes 2 seconds. Oh, it's so good. I travel with one. I have one in the kitchen. I have made 25 heptillion AeroPresses in my life. It's so good. It's the best cup of coffee. Just get they're like $25. Just get an AeroPress. Anyway, go on.
And this is the David Moscrop Show, brought to you by AeroPress.
Actually, the company is shit. They got bought out by private equity, and they have all these new. They brought out like an aluminum one, and then if you read the fine print, it says, "Do not touch the cap after you make the coffee because it will be so hot it will burn your fingers." And I'm like, well, that $150 decorative aluminum AeroPress certainly looks lovely.
I actually might buy an AeroPress now. I mean, at $25, I'm like, I might hang the expense and the time and just kind of like try to center myself in the morning a little bit. But
it's so good.
I might do that. I might see. Look at this. This show's paying off already, and people listening, see?
Yes.
See, it's paying off.
Yes. From one coffee geek to another.
From one coffee geek to another. You mentioned the Roman Empire thing earlier, but this is like my Roman Empire. Is that how often because I don't actually think about the Roman Empire all that much. But I do think about Enshittification a lot. And,
funny.
And it's because it's just, I look around, I'm like, oh, that's Enshittification, and that is, and that is, and that is. And when this video gets demonetized because I'm swearing so much, like that's going to be it. And I think to myself, like, what was that aha moment when you're out in the world and you think, oh, I've got this conceptual apparatus for understanding all this nastiness. Where did that come from? And I guess really quickly, for those who don't know, first of all, what is Enshittification?
Well, so there's the quick version and there's the long version. I'll try for a medium version. And the quick version
the AeroPress version.
Yeah, it's a fun, dirty word that you can say to describe things getting bad, particularly internet things, but it's attached to a whole critique. And the critique describes what we see in companies that are enshittifying, which is typically that you have a platform, which is kind of the endemic form of business online, right? Where you have these businesses that serve other businesses and consumers, like Uber or Amazon or Google or whatever. And they're good to their end users first. They find a way to lock those end users in. And then they start to extract value from those end users to tempt in business customers. They hand it to the business customers. And then those business customers get locked in because they become dependent on those end users. and then they take the value away from them. So this is kind of where it differs from the like very simple-minded, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. Facebook exists to serve its advertisers. If you ever talk to someone who's advertises on Facebook, they hate Facebook. They get ripped off as badly as you do. It sucks for everybody. It's only good for Facebook, right? And that's the third stage, where the company claws back all the value, leaves behind the bare homeopathic residue needed to keep people locked in, and then turns into a giant pile of shit that still trundles on because, you know, of other forces related to monopoly and competition. So that's like that's the life cycle. The mechanism, right? Like what's going on inside the body corporate that allows that is digitization. So this is why apps suck, right? If a thing is digitized and networked, then the way it works can change every time you use it. And what that means is that companies can play like this figurative, extremely fast shell game where they can hide the value really quickly. So, you know, your search results, your costs, your payments, your everything just changes every time you use it. Even something as simple as like now that all these companies want you to use AI, they have moved the button you click the most and replaced it with an AI button in the hopes that you'll accidentally tap the AI button, right? And like just the user interface is different every time for that reason, right? But like in ways that I think listeners might care about more, that are more substantial, you know, you have in the United States, the primary way that nurses are hired for hospitals now is through these Uber for nursing apps, and they can acquire commercial credit data on nurses. And when you are being offered a job, there's a quick lookup that checks whether you have overdue credit card bills, and if you do, you're offered a lower wage.
Jesus.
Right? And that's like, it's, I mean, it's very gross, right? But it's also, it's not like grosser than anything, you know, Henry Ford did.
Yeah.
It's just the thing he couldn't have done because he couldn't afford the army of guys in green eye shades to do this in a way that would have made it possible to do it in real time and changed everyone's wages in real time, right? So it's just automation and digitization. And digitization is leaving the realm of things you see through a screen and entering the world itself. So, you know, in Norway, we now have ubiquitous digital shelf tags in grocery stores. The grocery stores reprice their items 3,000 times a day, right? And so this is all about like, just like, you do not know where the bargains are. You don't know where to go for your eggs and where to go for your milk or whatever. It just makes it really hard for you to get good at the game because your opponent changes the rules every time you sit down and play opposite them. So that's the mechanism. That's why it occurs in the internet. And then the final question is like, why does it happen now? Because all these companies were run by greedy jerks. They were always digital. So what made the greedy jerks who were digital able to do this now? And it's a collapse in sources of discipline that would have punished them for enshittification. So they no longer face competition because we stopped enforcing competition law. Because they no longer face competition, they've created these cartels and monopolies that can capture the regulators, so they don't have to worry about government discipline. It used to be that tech firms really did have to worry about a digital form of discipline in the form of interoperability, because digital devices have that same flexibility that lets you rip off nurses, but it also lets you advocate on behalf of users. So like the big example here would be like ad blockers. So more than half of all internet users have installed a browser-based ad blocker. It's the largest boycott in consumer history. And if you're a company contemplating putting more ads on your website, your like outcomes include the possibility that the user just installs a blocker as a result. And then that means that not only do you not get the revenue you used to get with the fewer ad load, the smaller ad load, but you never get any revenue ever again from that user because no one ever uninstalled an ad blocker after installing it, right? So that's a source of discipline. And we've seen the metastasis of IP law, which is really another kind of regulatory capture. So regulatory capture can be like, the government won't enforce the law against me, but it can also be the government will enforce the law against people who make me angry. And so IP law is basically made like scraping and reverse engineering, all this other stuff that used to be an absolutely reliable feature of digital tools. It's gotten rid of it. So in Canada, in 2010, James Moore and Tony Clement, who were ministers in Stephen Harper's government, consulted on whether to bring in a law that would have banned reverse engineering as part of the Copyright Act. And they got like 6,100 responses saying, no, you weirdos, don't do that. That's terrible. And 50 responses from people who said, this sounds good to me. And they, Moore gave a speech where he said, these are the babyish views of radical extremists. I'm not going to listen to them. And they brought the law in, right? And so once it's illegal to like reverse engineer and modify a product, it really invites people to do terrible things with that product. And this is how you get to the world that we're in with things like inkjet printers, where the inkjet printer ink has become the most expensive fluid that you can buy without some kind of security clearance, right? You pay like $10,000 a gallon for colored water to print your grocery lists, right? It's like more milliliter per milliliter than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winner, right? And it's because
But you
reverse
can't
engineering.
use that for
No, you can't
printing.
inseminate a mare with it.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay.
Nor should you try. So, we lose the discipline of interoperability. And then you had the last source of discipline, which was labor. Because although tech workers were historically had low union density and they were hostile to unions, they viewed themselves as founders in waiting and so on. They also had the power that arises from scarcity. In fact, that's one of the reasons they didn't think they needed a union. Because if you can just get a job at the shop across the street that pays more than the job you got now, why would you pay dues and have a shop steward and have to go to a fucking meeting, right? Just like if your boss pisses you off, you like flip him off and walk across the street and get a job somewhere else, right? And so tech workers held the line because a lot of them cared about their users, especially because the way that they were motivated to work, given how much power they had, was by appealing to like this sense of mission. Fobazi Ettar, librarian, she calls this vocational awe, right? Like, we do this to teachers and nurses and librarians and lots of other kinds of workers. And, one of the reasons Google and Facebook, they had these high-minded mottos, organize the world's information, make it useful, is that it really helped them instill in workers the sense that their work mattered. And so if you think your work mattered and like maybe you thought it mattered so much that you missed your mom's funeral to like ship to deadline, when your boss tells you to enshittify something, you don't do it, right? Like screw them. But then we saw mass tech worker layoffs, 260,000 in 2023, 150,000 in 2024, tens of thousands this year. And when that happened, just workers lost their power because solidarity is the only durable source of power for workers. And so here we are, right? We are just in this moment where all the sources of discipline that prevented enshittification from spreading from one company to another have completely collapsed. And so companies don't have to worry about competitors. They don't have to worry about regulators. They don't have to worry about new market entrants that devise technology that makes it easier for their customers or their suppliers to get a better deal. And they don't have to worry about their workers. And so they're just doing, I always say like the CEOs of these companies have a giant enshittification lever on the wall behind their desk. And every day these guys are showing up for work and pulled that lever as hard as they could. But for most of the corporate history, it just didn't move because these forces gummed it up. And now that these forces are out of the way, it just goes to 100. And that's what I think is happening right now. That's the enshittification we're living through at this moment.
I had a double barrel question in the last couple of minutes we've got.
Mm-hmm.
And I find myself kind of angry all the time. And it's because I spend a lot of time reading the news. And then sometimes I go, I'm going to take a break and just go read some history. And I'm like, well, now I'm angry about that. Or I see the connection between history and why we're getting screwed now. So I'm actually angry about both things, and I'm angry about them at the same time. And then I go and I read some fiction. I'm like, well, I'm going to take a break and I'm going to go read some a Martin Hench book by Cory Doctorow. I'm like, well, now I'm even angrier than I was before. And Picks and Shovels is out now. Every time a Martin Hench book comes out, I read it immediately, and I really enjoy it. And I've come to enjoy getting angry because there's a resolution that gives me a kind of sense of vindication and hope and possibility. And so the double barrel question is, are you angry all the time as well? And are you channeling some of that anger through the book? Is there a kind of almost Aristotelian sense of catharsis in this work? Because that's what I'm getting from it.
I don't know if it's cathartic. It probably is. Certainly, I write to cope with anxiety, which is how I wrote 9 books during the lockdowns. But I sometimes get this question about like, when is didactic art good and when is didactic art bad or whatever? Are you preachy? Do you worry about being preachy? All of that stuff. And I think that the purpose of art is to take a big, numinous, irreducible, complicated, highly textured emotion that is in the head of the artist to imbue some intermediate medium with some a facsimile of that emotion, so a dance or a song or a poem or a story or a novel or a painting or a photograph, and then hope that that facsimile is transmitted into the mind of the audience when they experience the work. And for me, all of the big, numinous, weird, irreducible, crunchy emotions that I have relate to being furious, scared, and obsessed with how technology can be a source for liberation, how technology has become a source of control and reaction, what we're going to have to do to seize the means of computation, and so on. And so, I guess that what happens is that, like in these stories, I work through a lot of the problems that I'm having, and a lot of the fears that I have, a lot of the aspirations I have, and my characters work through them too, because they're aspects of me, because no person in the history of the world has ever known what any other person in the history of the world was thinking. There's exactly one person whose interiority we each have access to, and it's us. So every character that a fiction writer comes up with is just them.
Well, I mean, I feel this. I truly, truly, deeply feel this, and it's part of the reason I like these books. And again, I think there is a didactic quality to them where I leave having learned something. I'm like, oh, that was sneaky. I was caught up in this thriller, and I wanted to see what happened next in the plot. And I'm coming like, oh, I think I might have accidentally learned something here.
Another thing that I think gets a bad rap in fiction is exposition.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have these injunctions like show, don't tell. And I think the reason for show, don't tell is not that showing is bad and telling is good. It's that showing is harder than telling. Making exposition interesting is harder than making drama interesting. It's right there in the word, right? Dramatizing is dramatic. And dramatics are intrinsically interesting in a way that exposition has to work harder for. But good exposition is good. It's just hard. And so, I think we often don't know why we don't like things. We know why we stop. We know where we stop. We go, oh, this is lagging in the second act, right? I'm going to put it down. But maybe the reason it's lagging in the second act isn't because the second act is too slow or too long. Maybe it's because the first act didn't set up the stakes of the second act enough, and that's why the second act feels flabby. And when you're like editing fiction and trying to make fiction better, oftentimes the place where the symptom occurs is not the place where the cure can be found. It's a little like reflexology, right? Oh, your knee hurts, let me push your ear here, except it works, except it's not nonsense. And so there is often a lot of exposition, often about technical subjects that are highly salient. And I think that I actually have it somewhat easy in the kinds of exposition I do, because it tends to be exposition about things that are real in the world that matter to people, that like actually have a lot of explanatory power. So things you don't know, that if you understood them would explain a lot of the things that matter to you in your life that you sometimes wonder about. As opposed to like Tolkien, right? Who's doing exposition about things that never happened and don't mean anything, right? Like, what exactly did the War of the Ents, what caused it, what factions were in there, what were the tactics and strategy, right? It never happened, so it doesn't matter. And even if you understand it completely, it still doesn't matter, which is why the Silmarillion is such a boring book. Fight me.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, no,
Is it a
very
book,
bad.
or is it like
It is
a
a book.
reference guide?
It's a
I mean, it's a
well,
book, but it's not like,
it's a codex.
it's a
It's
codex.
printed on pulp vegetable matter sprayed with heavy metal and put between two covers. So yeah,
I was
it's a
talking.
book like object.
I was talking to my friends the other day about this because I was watching Andor, because everyone's like, no, Andor is actually the good Star Wars show. I'm like, so fine, I'll watch Andor, because it's about how the imperial bureaucracy is a mess. I'm like,
Sure.
okay, I get behind that. And I was actually okay. It's good. I actually quite liked it. And I was thinking, like, people get really serious about Star Wars canon, I noticed. And I'm like, you guys know it's all made up, right? Like, it's just all not, none of it actually. It's not like a debate over the history of like, when did the Nazis invade, like, Belgium? Like, it's
Right,
just, no,
right,
it's
right.
made up. It's just
Right.
fake.
Was Stalin wrong to believe that Hitler would honor the Stalin-Hitler Pact, right? Like
Yeah,
these are real questions that
we
mean
can get into
something and
that.
resulted in stuff like the siege of Leningrad, whereas nothing ever happened, that Alderaan was never destroyed by the Death Star. But I think one of the reasons that the lore, I'm not a big lore guy, I have to say, but one of the reasons that lore is so titillating and interesting is because, first of all, writers are making it up and they're probably palming a lot of cards when they start. And so probably it doesn't all hang together. And it's only because they don't get into a lot of details that you don't really see why it doesn't hang together. And then a lot of the things that are kind of lacuna or things that don't work in the story that sometimes get exposed in the lore are are things that reflect stuff about the author that you didn't realize until someone pointed it out to you. So stuff about
Mhm.
the story and about the author. So you come to realize something about the aesthetic impact that had on you. And it's hard to do it well, but like I read a book last year called Julia by Sandra Newman. That's 1984 from the perspective of the love interest. And she's kind of a millennial to Winston Smith's Gen X. And so like she doesn't think the party is all powerful. She sees them as like incompetent thugs. And there's like all these scenes where like there's a scene where like she gets called in to get tortured, and it's a different torturer than O'Brien. And the torturer is like, "Ugh, you had O'Brien last week. Did he do that fucking thing where 2 + 2 = 5 and he held up his fingers? He stole that from me. That son of a bitch steals my ideas like crazy and then proceeds to torture in ghastly ways, right? And it puts a completely different gloss on the story, and it makes you think through some of the cards that Orwell palmed. And we know that at the end of his life he was like really bitter. He this was the last book he wrote. He died, I think, before it came out, and pretty much the last thing he did before dying was he named names of his
Yeah.
comrades to a secret policewoman who he had a crush on, uh, because he wanted to, like, he basically ratted out his comrades. Like he was really posting through it when he wrote 1984. And the Julia really gets into it, and also gets into or the way Orwell felt about women. She recenters women in the story as something more than like adjuncts, and by thinking about the role women play in 1984, she also points out a bunch of stuff that was off stage and probably we should have been paying attention to when we read it the first time around. It's a great book. My daughter is reading 1984 in AP Lit right now, and we keep talking about AP Lit about 1984, and I keep thinking about stuff from Julia. Like it
Mhm.
completely reframed how I think about that book. So that's why I think lore, like when lore is another one of those things that's hard to do well, but when you do lore well, it's really good.
I want to close out on resistance because I've been thinking about this a lot too, and we talked a little bit about it before, but I always like to ask people about this because we get into these topics and you can feel a real sense of despair and hopelessness, and you're deep in the valley, and I always think like it's nice when you try to like climb out of the valley a little bit at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And are there any points of resistance you look to right now and think, hell yes, like there's a real fight there, there's a real struggle, there's a real pushback? This is the Luke Skywalker climbing into the X-wing who's going to take a shot at the. I'm gonna have to put a copyright notice on this now, maybe. At the Death Star. Like, do you look out there and think, "Oh yeah, this is his point of resistance"? That gives me a lot of hope.
Well, I do have a lot of hope. Hope is just for me the idea that there's something you can do that will make things better, and that maybe after you do that, there's something else you can do that will make things better still. And just because you
Mm-hmm.
can't see your way from A to Z, it doesn't mean there isn't a path. Um, in terms of things that I look to for hope, I'm very excited by what Sean Fain pulled off last year with the UAW and his call for a general strike in 2028. I think that a revitalized labor movement is the source of the countervailing power that can really do something about oligarchy and looming fascism. And I think we're going to have to occupy the unions first. Like we just went through 4 years with the most labor positive National Labor Relations Board in living memory.
Mm-hmm.
we are at a generational peak in public opinion of unions and in workers who want to be unionized. Unions themselves have the largest cash balances they've had in living memory, and yet so little of it is devoted to organizing that at the end of those 4 years there were fewer unionized workers in America than there were at the start of it. So we need to bump those fuckers off, right?
Hmm.
And we need to replace them with people who want to go out and sign up union members and flex union power. And I think we can do it, and I think Sean Fain showed us how we can do it. And when I think about all those other factors, right? Like I think about the squandered opportunity and I get really angry. But then I think
Hmm.
about the opportunity itself, which is not gone forever. It's just going to be harder to do this under Trump than it was under Biden's NLRB. When I think about the opportunity that we have that didn't go away, I get really excited. And I think the same is true about antitrust, where we don't have a lobby for antitrust. There's no like dark money, billionaire funded network of organizations that are trying to get governments to do more about corporate power. Like the reason we've had policy that was meaningfully opposed to corporate power is because we had political will and not the other way around. And so the fact that Trump is like dismantling the policy doesn't say anything about the will, in the same way that the fact that Trump is dismantling the NLRB doesn't say anything about public support for unions or the willingness of people to join unions or the power of solidarity and labor. I've been reflecting on the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, and how the Grinch steals all the streamers and the tinsel and the baubles and the trees because he thinks the reason that people feel Christmassy is because they're surrounded by this stuff, and he's wrong. The reason people surround themselves with this stuff is because they feel Christmassy.
Hmm.
The reason we have a National Labor Relations Act and a National Labor Review Board is because of labor power. It's not the other way around. Labor power doesn't come from the NLRA. The NLRA came from labor power. And antitrust did not come from wonderful, amazing leaders like Lena Khan and Jonathan Cantor and Rohit Chopra. The reason they were able to be wonderful and amazing is because of the public feeling that we have to do something about concentrated corporate power. So I'm very excited about that. I think that there is a real energy in the world that wants to be directed into something. And I think a lot about Naomi Klein's idea of the mirror world from Doppelganger, that when you look at some of the shock troops of the far right and what they believe is the kind of mirror world version of what I believe. Right? Cryptocurrency people who talk about centralization and why they want to be decentralized, I believe we should be more decentralized. I think centralization on the internet is terrible.
Hmm.
I think that they got led astray, right? If they're sincere in their views about centralization, I think they got led astray, and they maybe can be redeemed. The people who are anti vaxxers because they don't trust big pharma and they think that regulators are asleep at the switch, I think that too.
Hmm.
I think vaccines are good, right?
Yeah.
But like, I got prescribed opioids in 2010 or so in when I lived in the UK by a Harley Street quack, like a fancy neuropathologist or psychopharmacologist or something. And he was like, "No, they're much safer than you think. You should take them for the rest of your life." I became an opioid denier. I was like, no, I did my own research, and I think that this is a very bad idea. And I think I'm alive today because of
Yeah.
it, because I have chronic pain, right? And like, I could very easily have gone from tramadol to oxy to fent over the last 15 years and be dead today
Hmm.
because I did my own research, right? And so when I meet people who are like, I don't trust big pharma, I don't want to be one of those shit libs who's like, no, you should trust big pharma. They're full of scientists who know the truth, right? Like, I think we should meet them where they are and say, you're right, big pharma's terrible, and their regulators suck. And also, here's why the science on vaccines is good, but like, no, let's go after big pharma. Let's get their asses,
Hmm.
right? So I feel like it's going to be hard, but there is less distance, and this isn't horseshoe theory or anything, but there's less distance between people who believe the things I believe and some of the people who voted for Trump and believe the things that the people in his orbit say.
You know what? That's pretty damned hopeful. I think that brings us around, and also bringing us around is this: uh, Picks and Shovels is out. It's on the bookstore shelves. You're working on an audiobook now that you've been
Oh, it's done.
crowdfunding.
It's
Has it?
out.
It's done.
It's out. Well, it'll be out by the time this airs. Yeah, and so,
Who's reading it?
it's Will Wheaton.
Oh well, it's Will Wheaton again. He did the last one
Yeah,
as well.
he did the last two. Yeah,
two.
he's great. He's just great.
He's fantastic. I
Yeah,
listened to the second the with
Bezel.
yes the Bezel with Will Wheaton. The prison.
Yeah,
That's the prison for profit prison.
that's the
Prison one.
for-profit prison one. Yeah,
Fantastic.
this
I
is the
mean,
Ponzi scheme one.
yes. Let me tell you, people who are listening, go get the audiobooks are great. I would listen to it at the gym. I'm like, I think I'm lifting like 5 to 10 pounds more when I listen to these books in the gym. You might listen to hardcore metal. You might listen to art. I listen to Will Wheaton reading Cory Doctorow. I'm like, this has made me 20% stronger because I'm so
That's
angry.
awesome. That's
So
awesome.
it says you should turn this into like a workout fad because they're
The audiobook workout. Do you
uh,
know Jane Fonda did the workout tapes because she had a bunch of social justice work she wanted to fund, and she figured it'd be a money spinner.
she was
That's
right.
that's why
She
she
did.
that's why she like she was I forget which activist she was talking to. She was talking to some guy who'd been very effective, and he was like, if you want to do the stuff you want to do, you're gonna need a ton of money. And here's how and then she just went around, she was like, oh, these workout tapes, I think I could become very like make a ton of money. She plowed it all into things like indigenous land claims and just like very good causes.
So
So
like my
there's
mom was an inadvertent funder to 1980s activism.
indeed, yes. Did she
Yeah.
have the Jane Fonda tapes? Yes.
Oh, for
Then
sure. I grew up
absolutely.
in those. They were, yeah, they were there. There's
Yeah.
still in a box, I'm sure somewhere. I'm sure.
Ah,
Well,
well,
I
they will have delaminated beyond the point of readability at this point. So
see. We never truly own that. That's another thing. We didn't even talk about this. But you never really truly own anymore, do you?
no,
That's a
certainly
whole.
not
We'll have to do a
not
different one
digital
on
media for
not digital.
sure.
That's a whole different thing. But
Yeah.
well, next time we'll talk about that. Well, the Picks and Shovels is out now. It's very, very good. The whole Martin Hench series is great. People should check it out. Thank you so much for joining me on episode
Thanks,
one. I
man.
was so pleased to have you. And I look forward to seeing you again. And I look forward to everyone out there checking out your books and adopting your 3-step audiobook workout plan.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David.
My pleasure entirely. And thanks so much for listening to all of you. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks.